So we're expecting quite a lot of you to join today, so we're just going to try and keep this as smooth running as possible. So if you could just keep yourself muted for the entirety of the call, that would be great. If you have a question, there will be a chance to ask that in the Q&A section at the very end. Jack will tell us a bit more about the structure of the event in just a few moments. If you need closed captions, that is available on the bottom of your screen. So if you need those, just give that button a click. This is being recorded, so if you would like to keep your video on, that is completely up to you. It's always nice to see faces, but at the same time, if you just want to switch off and listen, that's absolutely fine. And finally, this talk is likely to cover some heavy issues as we are discussing issues related to mental health. So if you need to take a break or leave the call and come back, that's absolutely fine. I'll be monitoring the call so I can let you back in at any time. Great. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you on to our co-founder, Jack.
That's great. Thank you so much, Annie, and lovely to see so many people in the call. I'm just going to wait for Annie just to quickly share her screen, and then we will get started. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So thank you for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. And it's great to have so many people here, as I said, to join us for this really important conversation. Before we introduce the panel, I'm just going to very quickly talk about the schedule for today's session. So we're going to have a very quick introduction to us as an organisation, what we do, why we do what we do, and how this relates to the statistics, the current statistics of the current landscape on mental health. And then we're going to delve straight into our panel discussion with our wonderful panelists. And then there'll be time at the end for any questions. We ask that questions please be put in the chat box, and that will be monitored by myself and Annie. So thank you very much. So us as an organisation, we're Voicebox. We offer drama and discussion-based workshops and assemblies surrounding healthy masculinity, gender, and a range of associated topics. We were established in 2019, where we saw this vital need for young people to have a safe space to discuss and explore the role of masculinity in consent, gender-based violence, misogyny, relationships, and mental health. And as I said just now, we use drama and creativity to engage single and mixed-gendered young people in productive, empathetic, and accountable conversations of what it means to be a man today. So our expert team of professional facilitators aim to create a safe and open environment for young people to understand how unhealthy masculinity is harmful for everyone, and the young people provide with a space to explore what healthy masculinity looks like for them, and how this will help them live happier, healthier, and more fulfilled lives. And we enable schools that we work with to continue this learning after our sessions have finished. Next slide, please, Annie. Great. So what do we do? So as you can see, we work with a range of key stages. So I'm just going to break down these very quickly. So our introduction to masculinity assembly. This is an interactive assembly for students to understand what masculinity is. We identify where we learn masculinity from, and we understand how it happens and how we live up to masculinity, and how this can have an impact on our relationships, our mental health, and our sense of self. And as this is a huge topic, this comes in handy before delving into the drama and discussion-based workshops. Our Healthy Relationships workshop, this allows students to connect with positive relationships that they have in their lives and consider what makes these relationships positive and healthy. And then we discuss how gender stereotypes can maybe impact real-life relationship scenarios, and we look at practically exploring these solutions to overcome conflict and commit to challenging gender stereotypes and improving these young people's relationships, whether that is platonic, whether that is romantic. And then our Healthy Masculinity workshop, which is focused on being a good man. So we define these important key terms of healthy and unhealthy masculinity, and we discuss reasons as to why we should aspire towards healthy masculinity. We'll also, again, look at this in action and understand the negative impacts of unhealthy masculinity, not just on the young person, but on society and on people within the school. And then we look at practical ways of exploring not only how to do healthy masculinity, but how to sustain that once we leave the space. All these workshops, as you see there, are part of the PSHE curriculum, and they are edited and adapted based on each key stage, so key stage 3, 4, and 5. And these are all available for single or mixed gendered groups. And then finally, very exciting, in the beginning of 2024, we'll be launching our Key Stage 2 gender stereotypes workshops. So this will be for year 5 and 6 primary school students. And we look to learn the basics of gender within these workshops, recognizing gender stereotypes and how these are perpetuated in children's books, in TV programs, in toys, and in games. And we look to challenge these stereotypes and ask the young people to challenge these stereotypes, highlight the importance of challenging these and how it has a positive effect on young people's relationships and their well-being. And then we empower the students to be advocates for inclusive learning environments where all students within the space, regardless of their genders, feel welcomed and they feel valued. Thank you very much, Annie. So why do people need to talk about mental health? So boys and young men today are rightly being encouraged to reflect on these traditional ideas of masculinity. We now know that traditional ideas of manhood are harmful to both men and to those around them. And this contributes to a number of social issues, including homophobia, violence against women and girls, mental health problems in boys and young men. However, despite this, male violence against women and girls is getting worse. 3 times as many men and women are dying by suicide, and sexual harassment and sexual violence within school settings is unfortunately increasing. So why is this the case? Thank you, Annie. I'd just like to read you this very interesting quote by Matt Pinkett, who's the author of Boys Don't Try and Boys Do Cry. And he says, when talking to teenage boys, admonishment and condemnation, rather than polite and courteous and informed discussion, only serves to reinforce misogynistic narratives. So the word toxic is constantly used in language surrounding masculinity. And these boys and young men often don't have the time or space to fully understand what this really means or why traditional ideas of masculinity are harmful. And as a result of this, many of the boys that we work with, many of the boys in wider society feel very lost. They feel very confused. And they think that being a boy is wrong, or they just become defensive and disengaged from discussions about gender and about masculinity. And this, coupled with the rise of unhealthy masculinity being promoted on social media by the likes of Andrew Tate, who I'm sure we will get into later on in the discussion, has led to some boys adopting these harmful ideas of masculinity and gender, and it plays into these unhealthy attitudes towards self-care, towards well-being, and the treatment of women. Thank you, Annie. So why does men's mental health need an awareness month? So 77% of men have suffered with common mental health symptoms like anxiety, stress, and depression. 40% of men have never spoken to anybody about their mental health. And 29% of those who haven't done so say they are too embarrassed to speak about it, or 20% say there is a negative stigma on the issue. Some very harrowing facts there. So why should schools care about boys and mental health? So in the last 3 years, the likelihood of young people having a mental health problem has increased by 50%. So now 5 children in a classroom of 30 are likely to have a mental health problem. 67% of young people have encountered influencer Andrew Tate's content, or 52% of 16 and 17-year-old males, and 44% of 18 to 24-year-old males retaining a positive view of his material. And children and young people say that sexual harassment occurs so frequently that it has become commonplace. So what is the solution? I'm very thrilled to introduce you to our wonderful panel who are going to really sink their teeth into this discussion. So from left to right, I'd love to introduce you to Stuart Davenport, who is the school counsellor and wellbeing supervisor at the Complete Works School, which is an alternative provision school in East London. Chris Filbey, who is the assistant head at Epsom College, as well as the pupil welfare and wellbeing lead. Will Hudson. So Will leads workshops on masculinity and is currently studying a PhD as well as studying to be a therapist. And then finally, Ellexsys, who is a year 13 student from West Hatch High in Chigwell, Essex. So lovely to have you all here with us today. I think we will just get straight into it because I'm aware we have lots and lots to get through. So I'd like to start with really unpacking this issue of pressures on boys and young men. So I want us to just open it up to our panelists here. So in your opinion, what are some of the biggest pressures on boys and young men today?
I'll chip in first if you like. I think from what I see here at Epsom, I think social media and body image plays a massive part. I think there's also been a huge number of things going on in the last few years that have played into things. We'll probably talk about COVID today and the difficulties that has created. There's also been some really big important movements, things like everyone's invited, but it's led to a lot of pressure being placed on boys and on teenagers. I think there's been a relentless focus on toxic masculinity and rightly to a degree, but it's led to young men and boys struggling to articulate the positives of being a man. And there's this sense that being a teenager is like being in a goldfish bowl, and childhood is shortening, and those crucial formative years when children are growing up and need an environment where they can make mistakes and learn from them, freed from adult pressures, that just feels like it's being taken away.
I would agree on all of those points, and also very much emphasize the change in society and the changes that are happening so quickly. Social media being a big part of that, and the way that it's used, particularly within mental health as well. A lot of people are looking for and finding answers online and looking to seek those answers through like TikTok. But the danger with that is that oftentimes the information isn't accurate. It's misinformation, and it's actually adding to the anxiety and the pressures that young men are feeling. The sense of something not being right with them, being wrong with them, whilst at the same time, the toxic masculinity idea of toxic masculinity challenging some of the traditional sense of who they are. So they're kind of left in this, you're very much like a black hole of, where do I go? I think that's why we're seeing a lot of increased levels of anxiety, depression, because they're struggling to socialize, to feel a sense of who they are, to think, well, is this okay? Is it not okay? Things that has always challenged them, but there's increasingly less places for them to perhaps find those answers, or to feel safe to find those answers without being perceived as toxic or part of the problem. So it's why it's very important that we have people like ourselves here and yourselves at Voicebox as well, to be able to talk about these things, and to actually, I think, more broadly recognise that it's a conversation that we all should be having and we're all part of, and it's not just an individual thing that we're working on. I think that's important for us to recognise as well.
Yeah, just build on that as well. That absolutely agree with what you were saying, Stuart. And I think that masculinity, the shape of masculinity has really changed over the last 50 years or so. We've really seen a lot of, through the evolution of feminism, through LGBTQ rights, through lots of these, lots of growth in these kinds of movements that have pushed masculinity into different areas and very interesting areas. Now, that's helped to kind of unpack a lot of stereotypes that, the idea about kind of men not being able to show emotion, not being able to be caregivers. We're kind of challenging the notions now that masculinity is about aggressiveness, competitiveness. In fact, there's a lot of research now that is really kind of disproving all of these ideas that, somehow men or are just naturally born to be something in the DNA, like naturally born to be kind of more aggressive and more competitive. So we're really like challenging some of these assumptions, and that's really kind of changed, I think, over the last sort of 50 years. Also the idea that kind of masculinity is somehow something that is talked about from only a white male viewpoint, or that masculinity is somehow just about men when it's not. You know, the idea of masculinity is not equatable to the idea of men as well. So a lot of these ideas are really kind of being turned on their head and being challenged. And while that can be like a really liberating idea, it's kind of left us in a place where there's very confusing as well. It's like, well, what do I latch on to? What does masculinity actually mean? So when they've got all of these options, and it's quite a sort of subjective point of view about how I experience my masculinity, what do I really cling on to? What does it mean? You know, and I see a lot of the young men that I'm working with kind of really trying to find those answers.
In my opinion, I think one of the biggest pressures is social media. I think Chris mentioned it earlier, especially on TikTok. Coming from a teenager, that app is mostly used by teenagers, and you know, when you go on the app, you see a lot of men successful, and you see men with these, for example, body image, right, for boys. You go on social media and you see a lot of these men with these bodies that are modeled and basically off using stuff like steroids and stuff. But if you're a young boy who isn't really confident in their own body, and you see all these other men, you know, with their shirt off in these pictures, you're going to have a lack of self-esteem, because you're going to think, well, there's something wrong with me. Why can't I be that? I think another big pressure is just to succeed as a guy. You know, you see everyone else. Social media is a place where everyone lets everyone know what they're doing. And you see all of these other people being successful. As a man, one of the things that's kind of told to you as a young child is to be successful and to work hard and achieve your goals. And when you see everyone else being successful, and maybe you're not really on this path of being successful and you're failing, it's also going to correlate to you also having a low self-esteem. So I think the biggest pressure for a young man is definitely social media.
That's great. Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, I think it's important to obviously highlight that there's not a one single set of pressures that all of these young boys and men face. It's different for every walks of life. And that's different based on cultures, you know, locations, year groups, identities. I think I just want to go back to Will very quickly and just ask, obviously, Will is a facilitator, so he works in a lot of different locations for us and for other organisations. And I just would, like to get your reflection and your ideas on, are these pressures similar across these groups? Has there been any standout differences, for example? It'd be really great to hear your thoughts on that.
So I think one of the things that kind of stands out across the board is that with the education that we have around masculinity, we have around relationships as well, I think is a lot more robust than it was previously. I mean, when I was growing up in school, I didn't have any of this kind of education. So but what happens with that is that I think there's a lot of pressure that young men face in groups about having to say the right thing about masculinity. And I think that's something that we really try to we really try to open up within the Voicebox workshops, is that we're not looking for a right answer. Like, I'm not looking for students to tell me what they think is, everything that they've been taught in PSHE and things like that. We really want to hear what young men really think about masculinity. And even if that is a viewpoint that I don't particularly agree with, because it's by opening up that space and allowing young men to be able to talk and to be able to express themselves freely, that we can really kind of find out what people think, and that from there we can see, okay, well, if there's a viewpoint that is problematic, how can we tackle it? But if we're just expecting young men to talk about what they've been taught that masculinity means, then I think we're really doing we're doing them a disservice, and we're kind of shutting down a variety of viewpoints. Sometimes when I'm in facilitating workshops and I get to a point where young men in the group feel that they can talk about, or other students can talk about what masculinity means to them, then we kind of really start to unpack some quite interesting things. So, you know, a lot of young men will say, well, I agree on paper that young and men, that men and women should be equal, but, and then they will actually start to express what they really think. And that might take us into territory that is, I don't know, you know, comments such as, yes, but men have to be in control in the relationship. And then we get to a point where we have to unpack that. But if we're not allowing a space for young men to be able to even express that, then we can't get to that point where we're like, okay, well, why do you think that men need to be in control in a relationship? What is behind that? What's fueling that? Yeah. So I think that there is that sort of like underlying pressure to say what they think might be the right answer, and how do I bring my voice into the room. That's kind of one of the major things that I've kind of picked up on across the board.
That's great. And I'm sorry, I'm going to just throw this to you, Chris, and I hope that's okay. But I mean, you're coming at this from a independent school standpoint. And I'd just be interested to know, are there any specific pressures which you've seen from those young boys within Epsom?
Well,
which
I think when you put a group of boys and girls together in a school, societal pressures are reflected within that school, regardless of the situation. I would say we're a boarding school, and traditionally sport is really important to boys. And I'm a big believer in the power of sport, but it can then feed into body image and boys viewing sort of success through being successful on the sports pitch. It's one of the only environments where sort of boys are together and able to sort of feel that they can celebrate each other's successes. And really being mindful as teachers and as a school community of championing other areas of school life. We just had anti-bullying week, and we made it sort of unsung heroes week, and trying to cast as much light as we can on some perhaps less celebrated aspects of school life. I think also with it being an independent school, it is an expensive education, and with that comes privilege and opportunity, but also with that comes pressure, therefore, on boys to be successful, to live up to expectations, to follow perhaps in their parents' footsteps, perhaps a need to fit in and conform, that sense to have to throw the best party, or to have the latest phone, or to have the latest clothes can perhaps be magnified a little bit, I think.
That's great, brilliant, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question just because I'm aware of time and I don't want to miss out on some important conversations that we can have. But I think we should just delve a bit further into men's mental health now, and just looking to see the progress that has been made. And it's fair to say there's been a lot of positive work in schools and in these mainstream media to increase that awareness of men's mental health. And there's obviously, with the fantastic schools we're working with, there's a need and a want to encourage these young boys and young men to talk about their mental health. So yeah, I'd like to just talk about the progress that has been made, because I think it's really important to celebrate that as well. So for example, are more boys talking about their mental health and, you know, going towards the support services that are available? And I think this is a perfect time to go to you, Stuart, if that's okay, just to ask from your perspective, like, what progress has been made? Are these young boys willing to talk about their mental health and utilize your service?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that, definitely. So from my perspective, I'm our sole counsellor at our school, and we operate all over London. In some cases, I'm visiting students at homes as much as I am when they're on site. So it's quite a variety of students that I end up meeting with. I suppose from my perspective, there's more of a willingness to talk about feelings, talk about what's going on for them. And we're lucky in the sense that we offer a primarily one-to-one based education, so students are able to build quite deep relationships with their teachers, and that I do see the benefit of that. You know, one of the things that I do in my work is very much about supporting the teachers in recognizing what they can do in the moment with students. So I don't necessarily think it has to be separated out into they come to access the service to do that. I think what I'm seeing more is that, and helping teachers to recognise more, is those moment by moment interactions, that when they're with a student may say something that hints that they want to talk about something, and helping the teachers to notice that and to be kind of equipped in themselves and feel able to have those conversations when they're happening. So I think those moments are there. So I've sort of seen, I guess, my role sort of change and adapt within the context of the organisation I'm in to support everyone and including everybody in this talking about mental health. And I think as a school, what I've recognised definitely is that the content of assemblies where we have students participate, they're talking more personally about things that are going on for them. I think that's probably the key bit. Keeping things individualized, allowing people to share what they want to share at the pace that they want to share it, creating the environment. I think definitely for our school, we're very aware of the importance of creating a safe environment, but not only creating a safe environment, be able to think about for individual students what that environment looks like. What is safety to them? What's the space that they need to be, and working with them to create that? What's the space that they need to be able to talk more openly? I think we're societally where there's more of an awareness of that, more of an openness to think more about the individual and what's going on for them. I think that's probably where the solution often lies for this, is remembering it's a collective responsibility. We're all part of supporting positive mental health and masculinity, but we also need to be sensitive to the individual's experience. And I think a few people earlier on mentioned about being able to allow people to talk and express what they want to say without feeling they have to push away from it, or they're going to be cancelled. I think as schools we can create that atmosphere and environment. And I would say for our school, that's a big strength and a big thing that's helping our students to open up, talk about what they're experiencing, all the aspects of it, both the positives, the pressures, but also the successes. So from my perspective, there's a lot of benefit. But equally, I do recognise that there are still stigmas, particularly in my role as a school counsellor, and I often avoid saying I'm the counsellor first of all, and I go in and talk about me, what I can offer and who I am. So individualising myself, that often is the most helpful way I have found to engage people, to be able to feel that they can talk and have the opportunity to talk about things that maybe they can't talk about with their teachers or other people if they are opening up. So there's still some challenges there, definitely, but there's definitely more conversations going on. And as I alluded to earlier on, social media, TikTok is helping people to talk about that because they're recognizing that there are these challenges. I think what's important is that we help people to think about how they process that information and utilize it and reflect on it for themselves. So that's just my input for that.
Oh, brilliant. I think it really just highlights that the role that teachers do have in shifting that mindset for students, which is it's great to see that's happening within your institution. I think as well, I mean, I'm going to come to you now, Ellexsys, if that's okay, but obviously it does feel like a while ago now, but lockdown and COVID wasn't that long ago, and the whole world shut down. There was a lot of social isolation, and I can only imagine what that would have been like for a student who then had to transition back into normal life. But with that, do you feel like there's been any progress made with how people speak about their mental health since that? I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on that, Ellexsys.
I feel like there has been more progress in terms of more people, in terms of my experiences, my friends checking up on me more, and me checking up on my friends more. To be honest, I didn't really have that much knowledge about mental health when I was younger. When I was young, back in primary school, I heard of depression, but only in terms of a joke. When people used to joke about it, but I never really knew the severity of it. So when I was older and I started to find out about these mental health issues, and friends around me started to be depressed, it was kind of hard for me to deal with because I didn't really know what to do. So checking up was the best thing that I could do, and I feel like the people around me have done the same thing in terms of checking up on people. I feel like it's still hard for boys my age to open up. For example, when I ask if they're doing okay, most of the time they say, yeah, I'm fine, but I don't really know if it's, they're actually fine or there's something going on, but they just can't say it. But I feel like there has been more conversations about it in terms of boys my age, but the stigma is still there in terms of having that strong figure and, I can't let anyone know my issues and I have to carry on going and it is what it is. I feel like that mindset is still there in people my age, but I feel like that is heavily due to COVID and, being alone. So people feel like they have to deal with their issues alone because maybe they are just used to being alone.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think it's yeah, it's one of those ones where they always, you know, the marketing at the moment is always ask twice, make sure we're asking people twice how they are. But I think, you know, it's about those mini victories, right, Ellexsys? You being able to ask your friend that question, that can have have an impact on that person, potentially have a domino effect. So the fact that you're having those conversations at the age that you are is incredibly important. And also, Chris, as well, I'd just like to see from your perspective, what do you think the conversations have improved at Epsom?
Yeah, I really do. We've got 2 school counsellors here. They're really, really busy. And there's a 50-50 split probably in terms of boys and girls who go and see the counsellors. Now, that has changed significantly from the past. And I do think that boys are willing to talk more about their mental health. But I also worry the other side of that coin is that the number of boys who are struggling and therefore talking about their mental health is just reflective of the scale of the mental health crisis. And what schools have really got to think about is how they can support boys and pupils at the top of the waterfall rather than picking up the pieces at the bottom of the waterfall. And I think that's where schools have got a lot of work to do about developing characters, celebrating character strength, developing character attributes, focusing on values. How can we build resilience? How can we get boys more comfortable with the idea of failure? Those kind of things, and trying to focus on the top of the waterfall as much as we can to prevent boys really struggling with their mental health is where there's a body of work to be done, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Will, I don't know if you wanted to add to that at all, based on your own experiences. Yeah, I mean, your perspective is a unique one, so I'd be interested to hear if you feel like there is this progress, or you feel like young people feel like they can be more vulnerable within these spaces.
I think there's definitely been progress. There's definitely a lot more that we can do with it. You know, I think it's more visible because we're talking about male mental health a lot more, and that is, you know, seen through, you know, the current month, you know, through the Movember Foundation and everything. We're seeing that it's okay to talk about male mental health, and that has been kind of an encouraging step. But I still think that we need to be able to set up the spaces and look at how we bridge the conversation into talking about mental health. I mean, sometimes when I've attended men's groups, we kind of leaned on some devices that people will use in men's groups, is that they lean on conventions that enable men to feel safe, like, okay, let's have a conversation about football or motorbikes or these kind of like very heterotypical ideas, but then through that we can also then talk about emotions. Somehow there's something there that we can lean on that allows us into a deeper conversation. Now, I'm not suggesting that always needs to be the device or the way in to kind of have those types of conversations. I think it can be like a bit more straightforward than that, but I think that's maybe one way into it. Something that I really try to do in a lot of the workshops that I run is to start off by talking about emotions and having a quick hands up as to, you know, who's ever felt angry, who's ever felt sad, who's ever felt lonely, who's ever cried before. And more often than not, most of the people in the room will put their hands up, you know, so that we can see that this is part of our human experience. Like we all feel emotions, we all, you know, and so that can really help to kind of it's a really kind of easy way, I think, to take away some of that stigma that somehow, you know, men shouldn't be human, and it can be a real strength to talk from that position. It can be a real strength to say to discuss and to communicate about emotions. That can, and you know, and doing so, I think a lot of the young men that have been able to talk about emotions in sessions have really said how empowering that actually feels, because talking about emotion and mental health is not about, you know, crying in a corner. It's really a position of like, this is who I am, this is my experience, and this is my truth, and I can speak from a very authentic place. I don't need to hide behind you know, an idea or convention of what masculinity should mean. That can be very liberating.
That's really interesting. Thank you all. That's fantastic. I'm going to actually just flip it slightly. I'm going to look at the polar opposite now, about harmful messaging. And actually, is there conversations that we should be having about us potentially going backwards? You know, there has been all this great work which we are seeing and we're encouraging, but obviously we see that there is a lot of work still to do. Just an example of one of the workshops which we have been in recently with a group of Year 9 boys, you know, quoting that depression isn't real. Like, if my mate was depressed, I'd just tell him to man up. If real men don't kill themselves, etc., etc. These pass away comments which are just floating around workshops, which actually have a lot of weight to them, which we're seeing coming up a lot more often. And as I say, we'll go into those social media influencers a bit later on in this chat. But I'd be really interested just to open this up to all four of our panelists here. What do we think this suggests about some boys' idea around masculinity and mental health? And also, from each of your experiences, how common do you think these views are?
I'll start. I think the views are very common in terms of people my age, from my generation. I think these views actually come from young, in terms of what these boys were taught about how to be a man. You know, in terms of me, I was told to be like, men are strong and stuff. So when it comes to depression isn't real, people would say that because they don't think a man should show emotions like sadness or crying, because that's not what a strong thing is to do. That would be considered as a weak behavior when it's not. I feel like those comments are very actually common in people of my age group. It's quite bad, but I feel like it starts from young, you know, when they're not taught things about mental health, not really knowing anything about mental health, and taught they're taught like a traditional way of how to be a man, and not maybe a more, you know, modern and actual realistic way, because crying isn't a weakness, you know, but they're getting told that showing emotions like sadness is you being weak. And that's why they'll say stuff like real men don't kill themselves, because they will just assume that we have to get on with it, when sometimes things actually affect you as a person. And it's hard to just get on with things. And sometimes things boil over, and it's not easy to just get on with things. And yeah, I'm strong, I can go through anything, you know, which is a very unrealistic view that I think has been told and put into children from a young age.
Yeah, I think you're completely right, Ellexsys. And I think it's the experiences of a lot of men in society, you know, this idea that this rhetoric that, you know, we look up to our, you know, older male role models in our lives, and that idea that the way that masculinity functioned from our dads or our granddads or our guardians or our uncles, you know, that is completely different to the masculinity which we have now. And when we're young, obviously we're impressionable. We look to the expectations and the pressures around us and take them in to sculpt us into the men that we think we should be. So it's a very common thing that we're seeing a lot. And we also see that work with young people like yourself, Ellexsys, you know, a lot of times around culture, religion, a lot of times around expectations from male role models, that this is happening more than maybe we think. It'd be great to hear from you, Chris, about this as well. Do you feel like this is a common view?
Well, I think it's really interesting what Ellexsys has to say, really, because what we're talking about really is subculture in schools, and that can be the part that is difficult for teachers to always know exactly what is being said and what is going on. I don't think we are going backwards, and I think progress has been made. But they are these sorts of comments are symptomatic of the pressure that boys feel they're under. And Will spoke earlier about sort of how masculinity has changed and really positively, but also I think boys are now unsure of what it is, and some boys want to strive for and want to focus on being strong, or want to focus on perhaps a more traditional model of masculinity, but don't know who that role model is that they can aspire to, who can also show emotion and those other really positive things. So that boys are worried that if they want to present as something that's perhaps a traditional version of masculinity, they're going to be accused of being toxic, and they don't understand how that traditional masculinity still has a place amongst other types of masculinity, and how that can be presented in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something which we see a lot as well. You know, this idea that being strong, being brave, these aren't actually negative traits. It's just the case of when they're rigid and they're seen through a toxic lens, an unhealthy lens, sorry, that feels like the only option. But actually, I can be a brave human being and also be very in touch with, the healthier version of myself as a young man. Will, am I okay to come to you, please? How common do you think this is?
Yeah, I was just gonna absolutely agree with what Chris was saying. There's like, I think we have to be really, really careful that we don't conflate, conservative viewpoints, since a lot of young men do have, conservative viewpoints on what masculinity means, and it's more traditional. And, we shouldn't be saying, automatically drawing a parallel with that somehow being toxic, and this word, obviously this word toxic comes up a lot, and that's kind of bandied around a lot. And I think we have to be really, really careful of that. It's like there's no correlation between having a more traditional viewpoint on masculinity and being an Andrew Tate fan. And a lot of people, young men I've spoken to that do hold kind of more traditional viewpoints on masculinity actually disagree very strongly with Andrew Tate as well, in my experience. But I think, I've only really met in certain workshops very few students who are outspoken Andrew Tate fans, but I don't know to what extent people are holding back. Like, if they are a secret fan of Andrew Tate, are they not saying that in workshops necessarily, because again, the fear of that coming out, of that being kind of them knowing that is perceived as wrong to be an Andrew Tate fan. And I think we have to be kind of careful about not incriminating for that, but we need to know why. We need to know why they like Andrew Tate, for example. And I think that is a big part of our work, is really understanding the appeal of people like Andrew Tate. Like, what is he doing there that is that is able to, because he's cashing in on something that I think is kind of very, very specific, and it's a very sort of like packaged and digestible idea maybe of what masculinity means, that is quite social media friendly. It's quite sort of clickbait friendly and all of that, and I think that is something that is a harder sell when you're talking about a healthier form of masculinity, which is a bit more of a mature concept. It's a bit more of a complex idea as well, that you can be, you can be strong, you can be stoic, you can be all of these things, and you can be a caring, compassionate, considerate person. It's like we have to look for those role models and kind of find a way to make that appealing and accessible to young men. So I think, Andrew Tate comes in, he's like, you can be strong, you can be successful, you can be attractive, and I've got the way that you can do that. There's a clear marketability to that product, basically, of masculinity that Andrew Tate is selling. And there's an essence of the rebellion in that as well, which I think can be very appealing, especially to teenagers who maybe feel like a bit more disaffected. And we're kind of seeing that, as I think, throughout the world in general. We're like, there's a sort of within populations and politicians, we're seeing a kind of like a lot of people are being drawn into these sort of like hyper masculine figures, like Trump, like Viktor Orban, like they've just elected Geert Wilders of the this far right politician in the Netherlands. It's like these people who are able to kind of package an idea of, I'm a straight talker, I've got the answers, and this is what you want. That can be and I'm taking an outsider status against all of the rubbish. That can be a kind of attractive sell, I think, to a lot of people generally, but especially a lot of young men. So kind of gone in a bit of a tangent there, but I think there's something in that. I think there's something in understanding the appeal. What does Andrew Tate offer, and how can we understand that better in order to challenge it and offer role models which are stronger examples of what masculinity should should represent.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will. And I think that's a welcome segue anyway, because I think it'd be good to now just move on to, the elephant in the room that is Andrew Tate, just to talk about him a little bit more. For anyone who doesn't know who Andrew Tate is, he's a former kickboxer, and now he's a social media influencer. He believes in these ideas that women belong in the home, they can't drive, they're a man's property. He also thinks that rape victims must bear responsibility for attacks, and dates very young women just to make, as he says, to make an imprint on them. His views have been described as extreme misogyny by various domestic abuse charities, and he's shown that he's very capable of radicalizing young men and young boys to commit harms offline. But it's important to know that he's not, lurking in the dark web. He's a very famous figure on TikTok and very accessible to these young boys, where, videos of him have been watched over, I think I've got here, 11.6 billion times. And more young men in the UK know who Andrew Tate is over Rishi Sunak, according to a new poll recently. So obviously a very I wouldn't want to say well liked, but someone who people pay a lot of attention to. So it would be great to go to you, Stuart, if that's okay. From your perspective, obviously he's bound to have been brought up within various schools across the country, but how do you think he is impacting the students that you work with at your school?
Yeah, no, definitely. I've worked with and spoke to a number of students specifically around Andrew Tate and what it means to them. So yeah, it definitely is something that does present itself, and it's oftentimes it presents itself when there are boys talking together about specific things. They'll start to talk about Andrew Tate, and they'll start to talk about some of the views more specifically. I think it probably speaks more so to the pressures that they're under, the questions around their identity, as we've already touched on, who they are, what they want in their life. But I think it's also important to, particularly from our school, sort of acknowledge that many of our students come with SEN needs, and many of them are autistic as well. And we can't get away from that as well being perhaps quite a challenge, I think, for navigating those kind of conversations with students, because oftentimes they may take on the persona, or through masking, taking on those elements as a way to kind of find that identity which they're really struggling with, that sense of control, autonomy. Many of our students come from families that are also quite impoverished, in terms of socially very, very isolated, and financially struggling as well, and spend a lot of time just very, very insular in themselves. So there is a lot of anger, and we see that a lot in our school, a lot of kind of feeling of unfairness, that we deserve better, that I guess what it speaks of really is this sort of sense of being quite powerless, not really having a voice in the wider society. Oftentimes that's simply because many of the families themselves, English is a second language, and that becomes a barrier. So there are those sort of barriers, but I would also say there's sort of systemic barriers as well. When it comes to students who are struggling with feeling anxious, feeling disaffected, feeling lost, and then the sort of traditional support systems, like sort of CAMS for young people, not necessarily accessible to them. They can't go out and be there. They can't travel to visit these places to get help, to discuss things. They're isolated at home. They're not getting out into the wider world. So they're left kind of looking on social media for kind of answers to things that are going on. So I think we've touched on that quite a lot, but social media seems to be the kind of gateway, I would say, for a lot of the when we see the conversations come up at our school, it's because this video has come up, or because this person has commented on in this case Andrew Tate has commented on this situation, or what's going on here, and that gives me an answer, and I can take that, but it ultimately kind of masks some of those things that are going on for them. And what I would say is perhaps that Andrew Tate, broadly speaking, is more indicative, I guess, of what the kind of pressures and the questions that people are having around masculinity, but around what it means to be myself. How do I integrate myself in society? How do I get the things I want to get? They're all questions that I think students come to school with those, and a lot of us are still trying to figure those questions out. So I don't think it's necessarily just young people and boys that are having those kind of questions or attracted to that. The idea of this is the way to get all those things I've ever wanted. The kind of quick and easy. I think that appeals to us all on some level. Or quick and easy answer to things, a pill that will take away these things. And I think that is part of that attraction, is that it almost sidelines some of the discomfort of having to acknowledge that I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling isolated. And as we saw during COVID, that particular feeling was definitely felt. So it touches on so many different layers, but I don't think it's completely separate. It's in itself. It more indicates society, what we're going through, the changes we're going through, but also the individual students and young people's experiences and the things that they're being challenged by. And that's where I see it in our school, and what the kind of students that come and see me with those kind of questions. Who am I, and how do I get the things I want in my life, and how do I deal with feeling dissatisfied or lost or not able to engage with the things that I want to? So yeah, real challenges.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stuart. I think as well, I think it's obviously we're looking at from a young male's perspective, and rightly so. That's the influences Andrew Tate is having on these young boys. But I think, Chris, if it's okay to come to you, it'd be interesting to see, obviously, well, firstly, from a lot of schools we're working in, we're seeing how this is not just affecting these young boys, but it's affecting the LGBTQ plus community in the schools, young female women in the school as well, and teachers as well, like teachers not feeling like they have the authority, female teachers feeling like they don't have the authority because of the conversations which are being had and the influences that Andrew Tate is having. And it feels like it's not just affecting these young boys, it's affecting the culture of these schools, it's affecting the wider school community. Is this something that you've seen potentially at Epsom, Stuart? Sorry, Chris.
Well, firstly, look, I agree really with what Stuart and Will had to say there, and the fact that someone can't stand up is not standing up in a workshop and saying, aligning with Andrew Tate is a lot, because he's impacting the vulnerable. It's the people who are marginalised and don't feel they have anyone to talk to, which is why it is the most worrying thing, because they're being drawn into these views. But it impacts the whole school community, and it really does. And I talked about the subculture earlier. I don't think that we have a situation where female teachers don't feel that they can challenge it, but it's just so important that there is a whole school approach to Andrew Tate, and it needs all your teachers listening, picking up on bits and pieces in corridors and outside classrooms. All it needs is for one teacher to turn a blind eye to a comment, and all of a sudden that exacerbates it, and it just has to be a whole school approach, and all pupils need to have the sense that they can report things and they're going to be listened to. We use Whisper here, which is an anonymous reporting app, which the pupils can use, and they can anonymously flag things up if they're unhappy and if they don't feel confident going to talk to someone, and that's something that's really, really powerful. But yeah, I don't know if I've entirely answered your question, but it's just got to be a whole school approach, I think.
No, I think that's perfect. Yeah, you're so right, and everyone needs to be on board with this. Otherwise, we're not going to see that change. One person needs to. If that's one person jump ship, then it's just going to delay the process. So yeah, really important comments there. Thank you so much, Chris. I want to come to you, Ellexsys, from a student's perspective. Obviously, you're right in the middle of that kind of conversation surrounding Andrew Tate. Probably seeing him on TikTok all the time. You know, do you think it's affecting the people at school, your fellow students?
I think it affects how boys treat girls mainly. You know, in terms of the views, like girls should stay in the kitchen, and then I think boys will mimic that, but in a way as a joke, so it's not too harmful. But they don't really know that how it affects the girls that they're saying these jokes to. You know, they could start internalizing these comments and start to think that they have a lack of self-worth, and their only worth in life is just to stay in the kitchen, which is not true. So I think the major influence that he's had is on how boys treat girls, but I don't really see a lot of boys outwardly saying that they agree with Andrew Tate. You know, I think a lot of people are influenced by him, but they don't really want to say it in public because of everyone's same opinion on him, that they don't really agree with his views. But the people that do agree with his views, I think they're very silent in, you know, actually stating that they agree with him. But I think the biggest one is definitely how boys treat girls, especially because of his comments on how women should be. I think because it kind of damages women, some boys will be like, well, because he's kind of supporting boys in a way, now I can have these same beliefs as well and put women down, which is not really fair, because the views of that woman should stay in the kitchen and stuff like that is, it, in my opinion, it's completely not true. You know, they have much more to their life, and I don't think anyone should just be you should just say, oh yeah, your purpose is to do this. You know, they could do anything they really want to do with their life, and it's not to stay in a kitchen.
Yeah, and as you say, you know, this idea that it's okay to say these things, you know, it's banter, but also the effects it's going to have on these young women, sorry, moving forward, especially when it comes to their self-esteem and their identity or lack of identity. And we are kind of, you know, not always, but within those small comments, going back to this like traditional idea of masculinity, which, yeah, it's really interesting to hear that from the perspective of, you know, a student that hears those conversations probably more than some teachers do. So thank you so much for that. We've got a couple more points to make before we go into a Q&A, but I'd just like to go into a quick conversation about the challenges which we face, and it's how do we hold young boys and young men accountable for these harmful behaviours without alienating them or causing them to be entrenched in their thinking. So I'd be interested, I'm going to say this to all panelists, so feel free to jump in when you'd like. How do we think we navigate this issue? And how do we hold boys and young men accountable while attempting to bring them into the conversation rather than, you know, telling them off, so to speak?
So something that I saw quite recently when delivering a workshop at school was really, really positive. Is that the school had a really great culture of bringing in obviously us to talk about healthy masculinity, but also talking about female empowerment as well. And a lot of the students there were like really, really clued up about the legacy of power imbalance of they knew about the patriarchy. They were able to talk about that kind of really articulately. So a lot of the young women in those groups were very able to kind of articulate those ideas and understand what has been going on for centuries, for millennia, however far back we want to trace the patriarchy. But at the same time, they were also being very, very supportive to the young men in the group, and they were kind of really saying, well, you know, this whole idea and this whole stigma about, you know, men, boys not wanting to kind of show emotion because that is seen as weak and unattractive, to like that, we completely disagree with that. Like we want boys to be able to kind of speak up about their emotions and to be open with us. So I thought that was like really, really strong. So on the one hand, they had this really, really firm knowledge of that there has been there is a legacy of patriarchy. There is a legacy of power imbalance that we need to be aware of. All young people, I think, should be aware of that, but at the same time weren't incriminating boys for that. It's not like you're wrong. It's like, no, how can we work on this together? How can we evolve and change together?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it makes me think of an example. I mean, obviously we run mixed gendered and single gendered workshops, but there's always an issue when it comes to mixed gendered about the power imbalance within those spaces, where schools encourage mixed gendered sessions, but there's always that power imbalance. And we were at a school recently where one of the teachers, one of the young women in the space, in a single sex space, was saying, oh, we need the boys in here, they need to be held accountable, etc. And our facilitator was saying, well, how many of you put your hands up in the assembly to voice your opinions? None of them did. How many of the boys did? All of the boys. So you can see that there's intimidation within those spaces to actually get your point across. But I think what's really great and what Will's saying there is they are clued up with that power and balance, and they are clued up about how everybody can be part of this well-rounded way of challenging these stereotypes. That's great, thank you. Any of our panelists as well, any other success stories about how we bring these boys into this conversation?
I think it's so powerful when teachers are calling in boys rather than calling them out. I think that boys need to be challenged and sanctioned where appropriate, where behaviour is unacceptable. But the re-education piece is just so important and can't be overlooked. I think people like EDI leads in school have a really important role to play, and EDI is often in schools associated with race, and obviously that's absolutely vital. They've got a really important role to play in terms of gender and unhealthy masculinity and things as well. I think that's really, really important. A female teacher here overheard a discussion amongst boys about Andrew Tate, and then rather than just challenging them on it, encouraged them to talk about it and was really openly supportive of it. It's fine for you to strive to be successful, and it's fine to you if you want to strive for, you know, body image and all this kind of stuff, but then had a really frank discussion with the boys about the unacceptable attitudes. And that was just such a powerful, effective conversation in terms of educating the boys involved.
That's wonderful. That's yeah, really great to hear. Thank you so much, Chris. Stuart, can I come to you for that, please? Thank you.
Yeah. I think I've just touch on people already said. I think the importance of allyship, you know, framing it as an allyship, that we're working together, bringing people in, but also bringing attention to those conversations when they're happening. So I'm noticing when those things are there, rather than pushing back on it or cancelling them, which is what we're in danger of, I guess. If we shut those conversations down, if we punish them, then we're kind of feeding into the rhetoric around, we are being prejudiced, we are being judged, we are being criticised. So the allyship, but I think probably a big part of this, at least from the work that I do, is around stories. And I've heard that touched on by Will earlier on. You know, actually, when there was an opportunity for female students to sort of say, actually, that's a viewpoint that's being put across, but actually that's not what we find attractive, that's not what we look for in a man. But actually be able to share stories and to link it to sort of lived experience. It's very easy to sort of throw away a comment and say women should be in the kitchen. Well, how's that going to apply to your life? Oftentimes in my work, that's what I'm doing. I'm going, well, you hold that view, but let's think about it. And how would that play out in your life? How's that going to impact on you? Negatively, positively? What's the impact going to be? And oftentimes that's when we can start to get below those layers and peel back another layer of the onion, so to speak. Actually, what is it about? Maybe it's a fear of loneliness, you know. And actually, now we can sort of think about how we empower you, rather than pushing you away from people and society, and maybe you going down a path which leads you to be alienated from within your family even. Or wider society. But actually, let's see if we can get this thing that's going on for you met. If you feel lonely, if you're fearing that lonely, it's okay. Back to that allyship again, and that kind of normalizing which we've touched on, that's a normal experience. It's okay to feel that way, and we can talk about it. And probably most crucially, I would say, it probably touches on much of what we talked today, is leading by example. The change starts with us. We have to feel confident and able to have those conversations in and of ourselves. So I would always challenge people to take some time to think about, how comfortable do I feel to have those conversations? How equipped do I feel to have those conversations? Is there stuff that's going on for me that might make that difficult? I work with a lot of staff members who come to me and say, I'm finding it very difficult to engage with these conversations because of experiences I've had in my own life. And that knock-on effect then of actually stopping them to be able to have those conversations and break the cycles potentially for those young boys and young men. I think it's very important sometimes just to recognise, starting from ourselves and focusing on ourselves and how comfortable we feel, and having a system around us, a school around us that supports with that and can support us in lots of different ways, whether it's through a counsellor, whether it's through the right training, whether it's through getting workshops in, you know, where it's creating those spaces and going, well, we can do it together, you know, back to that allyship. It doesn't have to be necessarily just you individually. Let's create opportunities and capture them when they're happening, not when it sort of suits us in a timetable or something like that, because we'll miss that opportunity and it will be gone potentially.
That's great, thank you. some really amazing conversations happening this evening. We're going to just go on to one final section, but just a gentle reminder that if once we've done this section, we'll go straight into a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box now, just so we can delve straight into them. But let's finish on the solution. I mean, our aim today was to think about how we aim to engage these boys and young men in these positive conversations around masculinity and mental health. I think it's important to start with you, Ellexsys, because you being here today is a great reminder that, you know, the fantastic young men in this world that want to have these conversations and want to make these really positive changes. So from your perspective, what specific things do you think we can do? I mean, probably lots of teachers here as well, for boys and young men to have more positive conversations about masculinity and mental health.
I think the best thing to do could be to encourage talking about and maybe the knowledge of mental health from primary school. I heard that you guys are doing a workshop for Key Stage 2 people, which I think would actually be very helpful. As I said, when I was younger, I didn't really know anything about mental health in terms of the damages and what it could do to you. And, you know, obviously when you're in primary school, you want to have fun. You don't want to just learn about, I'm not saying to overwhelm the kids with information, but I feel like just so they can have knowledge of it, I think that's a good starting point, because when it gets to the point where maybe they start to feel these certain emotions, they're more comfortable talking about it because they know how it's going to feel and they've heard about it previously, and you know what happens when you have these certain mental health issues in terms of, you know, how you feel. But if you don't know any knowledge about these mental health issues, and then once you start to get a mental health issue like depression and you don't know what to do, that comes from your lack of knowledge from when you were younger. So I feel like bringing these issues in and kind of encouraging this in primary school kids would actually help a lot.
That's really great. Thank you so much. And I know Stuart, Chris, and Will, you've touched upon this slightly already, but is there any final points you'd like to add about specific things we can do to engage these young boys in these themes?
Only last thing I'd probably add is parents supporting families. I don't think we've touched upon that. You know, the system around the student. We've got the school. We're working with the school and supporting them when they're with us, but they're also outside of us. And as much as we might be working to challenge certain views, there might be things within the family unit or the system around them that make that very, very difficult and run counter. In some instances, hinder it. Whether it's, you know, back to what Ellexsys said about, you know, the awareness of it, you know, awareness of mental health. There's still a lot of stigma around what mental health is. I've encountered families where even when it comes to diagnoses like autism, that there's a disbelief that that's something that's real, that's a thing, and they'll often say, and it feels really strange to say, and quite shocking perhaps as well, you know, when they're going to get better, when is that going to change? So I think having conversations and helping parents be involved in and resourcing them with information, with things they can look out for, feeling that they can talk to the school and the school won't judge them for things like that. I think that's I would say is probably an extra bit that we could be thinking about. And I know we as our organisation work a lot with that, because we're dealing with families one-to-one, we're working with students one-to-one. So we do have that facility to be able to do some of that work, and it does make a big difference in terms of mental health. But I think also in terms of challenging some of the views, or some of the sedimented ideas around what is masculinity, or what is okay, what's normal.
Yeah, thank you so much. Chris, Chris or Will, anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but I think teaching character overtly in schools is really important. We've embedded character education into our curriculums, and I speak really hard. The work of the Jubilee Centre at the University of Birmingham, there's a load of free resources for teachers in terms of teaching character. But I also think that schools need to be really on the front foot, and the school community has to be on the front foot in terms of promoting and fostering healthy, tender masculinity. We're working with you guys this year to have an Epsom College positive masculinity program, whole year group assemblies, boys and girls together, and then after Christmas we're going to have workshops with smaller groups, and then crucially a student leader group that's going to hopefully get some of the really key individuals in particular year groups, and hopefully they can influence any existing subcultures and these kind of things. But it just must be done that way around, rather than reacting to unhealthy masculinity and therefore organising a workshop or bringing someone in. It's just got to be completely the other way around, normalising tender, healthy, positive masculinity rather than reacting to unhealthy masculinity.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, and just to follow on from that, I think we really need to encourage the young male leaders, you know, such as Ellexsys, you know, so people who are good examples of authentic masculinity, who can then become role models for other young men in the schools. I think there can be a lot more work done to generate these groups in schools, focus groups, giving that a lot of praise and a lot of encouragement. And as Chris was saying, I think that's the route into to building that culture of healthy masculinity within peer groups and within the wider school culture.
That's great. Thank you so much. Some really, really interesting conversations being had here. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to very quickly go into some of the questions which are being asked. These might be directed at you specifically, panelists, or it might be just a wider conversation to be had. But we'll go for this one first. And Ellexsys, this one's for you. So you mentioned that TikTok and social media being one of the biggest pressures. What do you think we can do to help address this issue? Social media isn't going anywhere. So what can we do to support young people who use TikTok a lot and get a lot of messages from this platform?
I feel like discussions about how the views that are expressed on TikTok and some of the people that are displayed on TikTok are very unrealistic, and it's not an accurate representation of themselves and their actual life. A lot of people see things on social media and think that that's what their life is actually like, but it's very easy to fake things on social media. You know, I was talking about body positivity and your body image before. It's very easy to fake having a good body, but if you're a person that's, you know, easily influenced and you see something like that, that image could be fake, but you're going to look at yourself and be like, well, there's something wrong with me, you know, and you're getting influenced by something that isn't actually a real depiction of what the person actually is. So maybe discussions about how some things on social media are fake and unrealistic and they're not an actual representation of what the person is.
Really interesting, thank you. This is for everybody. If girls are more aware of historical repression, are their families and also are the boys as well informed? And do they get taught this in school lessons as a priority? I can say that again if you need me to. If girls are more aware of historical repression, are the boys as well informed in regards to that? And do they get taught this in school lessons as a priority?
I mean, my experience that I just touched on earlier on in the school that I was working in quite recently, my feeling was that they were all given that education, and that was what was really helpful, because when the young women were speaking, these were all things that the boys were also familiar with. They weren't like alien concepts when they were talking about the patriarchy and they were talking about the historical legacy. The boys in the group knew what they were on about, and so that, I think that for me is really essential, that they do. Everybody learns about that. And sometimes the things that I point out a lot in workshops to young men is that we need to really have that awareness. I think, and that's not to incriminate young men, but I think men need to have an awareness that there has been a historical power imbalance, and we are carrying that legacy and that responsibility with us. So it's up to us as well to be active in making that change happen and transforming masculinity into something that is more equitable. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question at all, but just to throw that out there.
I think it's also really important to have a PHSE curriculum that it really reacts to issues like this. So, you know, got a PHSE lecture this week with you guys on positive masculinity, and the only real thing in schools about PHSE that's actually compulsory is the RSE, the relationship sex education. The rest is really can be sculpted by the schools, and there's a lot of flexibility there, and these are exactly the types of things that pupils need to be discussing and hearing about in PHSE, and crucially in other lessons as well as they come up.
Within our school, we have a concern system where teachers will log on things with our safeguarding system, but that's what we often use to sort of identify things when they're starting to emerge, things that are happening earlier, general safeguarding things, but also things like these sort of topics and sort of things, conversations that would happen. So we're all, as a school, we're very quick to kind of recognise what's happening and try and get on the top of that. How you said the waterfall earlier on. Chris, that really nice idea. Yeah, trying to get in there early and do things rather than it being reactive and wondering what's happened. And so that I think it requires that individualized approach to it as well, as much as it does kind of more broadly. But as a school, we're very aware of these type of issues and the prevalence of them, and we're quite quick to to recognise those trends and try and include everybody and as I said earlier on, allyship. So when there are workshops happening, there is an inclusion of both male, female, but also the non-binary and the ones that don't identify with either of those ones, having that voice represented as well, because I think that's an important part of the puzzle as well. We're talking about gender, we're talking about identity, we're talking about all the different factors that might make that up. And so having that sort of inclusive nature and everyone being involved and it being something we're all aware of.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, I'm just reading these through. So we are keen, this is from somebody in the chat, we are keen to develop increased support for one of our local boys' schools. I work for an MHST and we are aware referral numbers are much lower for teen boys than girls. Any suggestions on how to encourage this, as we are aware of mental health support the SUE of mental health support can sometimes alienate?
I can touch on this a little bit because I encounter this quite a lot. I think just being a presence, being aware, and one of the things very important to me is, whilst I want to be spending time seeing young people and working with them on a one-to-one basis, because that's primarily what I'm doing, actually, in order to enable that to happen, I have to be a presence. It has to be something that's normalised. This is Stuart, this is what he does, he's here and he's available to you. And I think sometimes when issues occur for a young person, if we're not in there kind of early enough, it's forgotten about, it's gone. It's no longer an issue. They've managed it, they've handled it, whatever that issue might be. So actually being a presence, being there, being available for when they might need it, as opposed to then kind of booking in or getting it as a set time. I think feels like quite a set model for the traditional way we might support adults. Book your time, come and see me on Tuesday at 4:30, but for a young person who's having some kind of mental health or some sort of challenge or difficulty, it will present itself when it presents itself. They may only open up for that short period of time. And I'm lucky in the position that I am in, that I'm there full time, and that has the benefit that I can go and meet with students as and when they need it, but it be accessible when they need it, because I don't think traditional kind of the format of we'll come and see it this time is going to work. I'm thinking about having drop-ins as well and making that part kind of around lunchtime times, because we've got some new sites now and there's more space for us and availability, and students are more on site, having those places where students can drop in to talk about things. Equally, sometimes for me, it's about resourcing staff and talking with the teachers and asking them, how might I best engage with the student? What might be some of the things that helps me to engage with them, particularly when it comes to SEN or neurodiversity, where it might be more challenging for them and they're maybe struggling with trust, they maybe have certain sensitivities. So I've got to be thinking about the space as well, the environment. So I think those things for me are the bits that I find help students to start to slowly feel they can come to see me, to build up and to know it's there, it's normal, it's not something that's separate, it sort of reduces some of that stigma around mental health or coming to speak to Stuart, it's because I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, but making it something that's normal as part of the culture of the school and the organisation. That's really, really key, and I would suggest that's quite a good thing to think about or be aware of.
Yeah, great. I have another question here. Thank you so much for that, Stuart. So This is to everybody. Can you advise any topics or tools that we could use to help in small sessions or one-to-one sessions, please? I'll let you have a think.
One of the things, can I jump in again? One of the things that we've used, we've sent out to teachers to be able to use, and to parents as well. It comes through Bold Voices. Bold Voices, they have things particularly around Andrew Tate, be able to have discussions as a parent, some advice or some ideas about how you might go about having those conversations, but equally for teachers as well. So I'm sure we can send the link out, but Bold Voices on their website, great organisation as well, that particularly have quite good resources and sort of lessons or discussion pieces, if you like, that might be useful if you want to have conversations around traditional masculinity or the impact of Andrew Tate, TikTok, or actually more broadly as well, how to have sort of conversations around what's going on for them, what do they think, and to do it in a way that creates that sort of safe space and environment.
I think this is perhaps not exactly the answer, but linked really closely is involving senior pupils, and we've got a really thriving peer mentor scheme where we've got year 12s, we've got 60 odd year 12s, and there's an equal split of boys and girls, and we try to train them up in sort of active listening and stress and anxiety management and these kind of things. And younger pupils are way more likely to have potentially these conversations with peers, and they can. There's some really great role models within schools, and they can hugely help in terms of in terms of these conversations and the conversations we want younger boys and girls in the school to be having. I think that can get overlooked, and given the right training, I think senior pupils in a school can be a really powerful tool. Yeah, it is like a buddy system. Sorry, I just saw that flash up on my screen. I'm not meant to be looking at the questions. It's sort of like a buddy system. Sort of like a buddy system.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. I'm going to call it there just because of time. Oh no, we've got one more. Maybe we can get one more in. Yeah, we've got 8 minutes. We're fine. Hi, I'm a trainee drama and movement therapist in my 2nd year. I'm working one-to-one with boys, and as an ex-drama teacher who thought it was easy to work with boys, I'm now recognizing how difficult it is to engage boys on a one-to-one basis. Any thoughts?
I think, I'll jump in here, and if anyone else has anything to add to this, I feel like when we've been delivering projects previously with boys where we've often come in with quite a set agenda of what we wanted to kind of talk about, and that we wanted to talk about masculinity, and we wanted to talk about what healthy masculinity means to them and what being authentic means to them, and and we've actually found that in a lot of cases that doesn't actually work at all. Like coming in with the agenda of talking about those things, we sometimes haven't made any headway with that, and actually we need to kind of just scale it down and just kind of be on a level with the people that we've got in the room, and just kind of talk about them like one-to-one, what your interests, what you into, what kinds of things motivate you, what makes you really angry, what makes you sad, and just kind of having those kind of more open conversations can then lead us into discussions about more related to gender, more related to how you perceive your masculinity and so on. So I feel like that is the way, I don't know, I found that is the most effective way of just kind of not coming in with a set agenda or plan as to what you want to achieve. Just be with young people in the space and find out a bit more about them, establish that trust, so that as a foundation for whatever comes next.
I got a follow up from this, which may help a little bit. But the person who asked the question said that they feel like it's really difficult to engage these boys as they don't appear to want to communicate. My training is allowing what's present to emerge, but one in particular won't engage, and they were just seeking some advice, perhaps. So yeah, not wanting to engage and actually not appearing to want to communicate either. Any suggestions? Not always easy, but
that is a tricky one, because it might be there they're not the right, it's not the right time for them, or maybe the right space for them. In my work as a counsellor, I'm under no illusion that suddenly they're going to open up just because I've tried to create new space and environment. I think sometimes we have to be kind and self, and recognise that this can be a challenge, and people may not be at that place if it's one particular student. I suppose maybe trying to engage them in it as well. Help if we sometimes can. I know for me, if I sometimes feel that I'm perhaps doing too much of the work, then maybe that's putting pressure on them as well. But perhaps we can include them in that, or take the pressure off and do something different. I don't know if you have the option to sort of take them out of that space and go somewhere else, but maybe the environment that's not conducive to it as well, for whatever reason. But making it a kind of group thing and a group conversation around it. What could we do to make this work or make this better? What might we like it to look like? Try to have creating opportunities for involvement as well, and making that a part of it. That may be helpful, but also equally it might not be that you get to that place with them, and that can be hard.
Yeah, thank you. That's really great. I am looking at the chat. Andy, who is on the call here today, he's one of our co-founders of Voicebox as well. And he's talking a lot about focusing on and celebrating small wins. I mean, Andy and Will actually have recently worked in a pupil referral unit where I think a lot of those small victories were had. And I think it's about sometimes actually just throwing the plan out the window a little bit and going, what can we achieve in this session? We're not going to achieve everything overnight. It'll be silly to think we're going to do that. So where can we find those little mini victories, and contextualize it to the needs of the boys as well? It's not always going to be the same, and they're not always going to want to do it that day. So yeah, as Stuart says, working out what they want to achieve and how we're going to achieve it, and then really focusing on that mini reward system, mini victories, I think is potentially a good step to take.
Claire just said just showing up for a young person is sometimes enough, and I would agree with that as well. That maybe that's enough. The fact that they're there says a lot. Maybe they're probably listening, they're probably observing it. No doubt they are. They just might not be at that place yet where they can open up. So that is that mini win. They're there. That's a good start.
Exactly. Yeah, completely agree with that. Wonderful. I'm going to call it there. Annie, do you mind just very quickly sharing your screen, please? Thank you very much. Wonderful. So thank you so much to everybody for attending today. Hopefully it's been helpful for you. This is going to be available on YouTube afterwards, so feel free to share that with your colleagues or anyone who you think might be interested. We're also going to be writing a blog post which just breaks down the themes which came out of the talk, and any actionable solutions that we can help with moving forward. In the meantime, as you can see there, please feel free to follow us on social media. There's our emails, there's our newsletter. It'll be really great if you can. I believe Annie has put website and social links in the chat, along with Stuart's details as well, if you want to get in touch with him, and any mental health charities that you might want to access moving forward. And finally, without further ado, thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Ellexsys. It's been a wonderful, really informative session. So thank you very much. Thank you all for attending. Have a lovely evening, and hopefully speak to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.